Under the provisions, would it be possible that an American citizen then could be declared an enemy combatant and sent to Guantanamo Bay and detained indefinitely?
I think that as long as that individual, no matter who they are, if they pose a threat to the security of the United States of America, should not be allowed to continue that threat.
Know good and well that someday there could be a government in power that is shipping its citizens off for disagreements. There are laws on the books now that characterize who might be a terrorist. Someone missing fingers on their hands is a suspect, according to the Department of Justice. Someone who has guns, someone who has ammunition that is weatherproofed, someone who has more than 7 days of food in their house can be considered a potential terrorist. If you are suspected by these activities, do you want to have the government have the ability to send you to Guantanamo Bay for indefinite detention? A suspect. We're not talking about someone who has been tried and found guilty. We're talking about someone suspected of activities. But some of the things that make you suspicious of terrorism are having food, having more than 7 days of food, missing fingers on your hand, having ammunition, having weatherproofed ammunition, having several guns at your house. Is that enough? Are you willing to sacrifice your freedom for liberty?
The last nail is being driven into the coffin of the American Republic, yet Congress remains in total denial as our liberties are rapidly fading before our eyes. The process is propelled by unwarranted fear and ignorance as to the true meaning of liberty. It is driven by economic myths, fallacies, and irrational good intentions. The rule of law is constantly rejected, and authoritarian answers are offered as panaceas for all our problems. Runaway welfareism is used to benefit the rich at the expense of the middle class. Who would have ever thought that the current generation and Congress would stand idly by and watch such a rapid disintegration of the American Republic? Characteristic of this epic event is the casual acceptance by the people and the political leaders of the unitary presidency, which is equivalent to granting dictatorial powers to the president. Our presidents can now, on their own, order assassinations, including American citizens, operate secret military tribunals, engage in torture, enforce indefinite imprisonments without due process, order searches and seizures without proper warrants, gutting the Fourth Amendment, ignore the 60-day rule for reporting to the Congress the nature of any military operation as required by the War Powers Resolution, continue the Patriot Act abuses without oversight, wage war at will, treat all Americans as suspected terrorists at airports with TSA groping and nude x-ray. And the Federal Reserve accommodates by counterfeiting the funds needed and not paid for by taxation and borrowing, permitting runaway spending, endless debt, and special interest bailouts.
Now, Noam Chomsky is, of course, the MIT linguistics professor who famously popularized the concept of manufacturing consent. For years, he's written about how the West uses a propagandistic press to coerce its own citizens and how it uses covert forms of violence to maintain power around the world. The U.S. is, in his mind, a leading terrorist state.
So on October 12th, I guess, a couple of days after the bombing started, Bush publicly announced to the Afghan people that we will continue to bomb you unless your leadership turns over to us people who we suspect of carrying out crimes, although we refuse to give you any evidence. Notice that that's a textbook illustration of international terrorism.
What the hell? Doesn't cost too much to buy another shell. Once I'm in your hands, you'll never feel the same. Don't let them say I'm bad. Have you guessed my name?
The December 5th, 2011 cover of Time magazine represents a disturbing truth. the American corporate-controlled establishment media presents a picture of the world that is meant to placate and pacify the people of the United States in favor of presenting reality as it is. While the covers of the European, Asian, and South Pacific editions have an image of chaos in the streets in Egypt with Revolution Redux in bold white letters in the center, the American edition is a cartoon with the headline, "Why Anxiety is Good for You." Is this just a meaningless marketing tactic, or does it exemplify the greater trend in how the American corporate media presents the world to the people of the United States? I tend towards the latter, given the fact that this is something that is inescapable when consuming media marketed to people in the United States. When I have the unfortunate pleasure of turning on the radio and listening to National Public Radio, I never cease to be amazed by the topics they choose to cover. While much of these economies of the world are in shambles, uprisings, both real and manufactured, are occurring around the globe. Brutal police crackdowns are taking place in the United States, and the federal government is attempting to legalize indefinite military detention of civilians, even American citizens, without a trial or charge. They opt for fluff stories with little to no meaning whatsoever. This is the unfortunate nature of the infotainment industry that appeals to the lowest common denominator instead of attempting to inform and educate their audience. The debatable aspect of this grim fact is if it is simply a result of sacrificing information and content in favor of ratings, or if it is a calculated agenda to dumb down the American people. I tend to fall into the camp of people who believe that this has been too pervasive and relentless to be the product of just doing whatever it takes to get ratings. When supposed legal experts claim that pepper spray is a food product while proving they are wholly ignorant of California legal precedent, one can't expect much. When the media selectively focuses forcefully on one nation's transgressions while ignoring the transgressions of our allies, speaks loudly of the depth at which the strings of media are buried. That being said, I might point out that the Egyptians did not in fact topple their government. Instead, they ousted Mubarak and replaced him with an arguably even more brutal military junta that was waiting in the wings. How can this happen? Is it just that they are seeking to entertain and not really inform? Or are news outlets actually there to make the American people perpetually ignorant, misinformed, and distracted in perpetual bread and circus? The mainstream media presents such a limited spectrum of information out there, especially when it comes to broadcast television, that it is hard to believe that it could simply be a natural result of the push for ratings over all else. The truth would command much higher ratings than any piece of fluff we see today. The worldview presented by the establishment media is so consistent and carefully crafted that it would be quite surprising if they all happened to decide to present such a version of reality completely independently. This outlook claims that the economy recovered when the government said the recession was officially over, that the government told us the whole truth about the attacks of September 11, 2001, and that we are never deceived about the true intentions behind conflicts abroad. However, reality continues to smash through this false paradigm presented to us by the establishment media, and with every passing week, another crippling blow slams into this false narrative. Despite the efforts of Time to present a cartoon and a light-hearted cover story as the most important news of the day. Much of America is realizing that there is truly more important information out there that is just waiting for them. The most fatal flaw of the establishment media is the Orwellian doublethink that is used on a disturbingly common basis. One of the most glaring examples in recent history is the case of Libya, where Al-Qaeda affiliated and rabidly racist rebels, who are comprised mostly of fighters belonging to designated terrorist organizations, became freedom fighters and pro-democracy protesters. While we are supposed to praise and laud these murderers and assassins according to the corporate media, we are still supposed to believe that Al-Qaeda boogeymen are around every corner hoping to blow us all up. A slightly more obscure example from September of this year came up when a media outlet was covering the usage of weather modification, also known as geoengineering, to combat a drought in Texas. While weather modification is an irrefutable fact, it is still nonsensically treated as conspiracy theory in many circles. When they speak about it on the mainstream media, it is a normal and acceptable solution to environmental problems. But if you should speak about it, you're labeled a conspiracy theorist. Unfortunately, this type of blatant doublethink and outright deception is becoming more prevalent, and the upcoming Time cover is a great example of how the events of the world are shaped and spun in the American mainstream media to keep the people of the United States from becoming agitated and asking too many questions.